Joining me now is Ryan McMahon with CMT. And Ryan, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell me a little about the technologies that you all are developing for the transportation sector?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of different devices to analyze driver risk. So we work with the insurance industry, mobility providers, with road safety entities to assess individual driver risk based on how safely an individual drives. So the way that we do that is through smartphone technology and IoT devices that are able to analyze risk events. And risk events are things like speeding, emergency braking, aggressive driving, and distraction. Driver distraction is probably one of the things that we have spent considerable amount of time on. And what we do is use these event data to identify the likelihood of a driver to get into a crash. So that information helps predict if that driver will get into a crash. The insurance industry uses our technology and our standards to assess that for a consumer. And from a consumer standpoint, they interact with our technology on a voluntary opt-in basis. So the insurance industry, 9 of the top 10 insurance carriers are using our technology to assess individual driver risk. An individual downloads an app. They get to see how their risk compares to what they believe their own individual safety is. But the really interesting thing that happens is, from a consumer standpoint, from a driver standpoint, we really don't get a lot of feedback relative to how safely we drive. And this technology allows that feedback to occur. And because we work with the insurance industry is giving about $4 billion a year back to consumers that exhibit safe behaviors. So it's opt-in, totally voluntary, but we have been now in business for over a decade, and we have analyzed enough individual risk that we have such a large corpus of information relative to how that individual risk interacts with infrastructure. So we have a really good view of the components that lead into crashes, not only for the individual, but also from a roadway characteristic standpoint, over time, over geography, weather, those type of things.
So people are voluntarily opting in to share this information.
Yeah, it's completely opt-in. And that's really important because the mission of the company is to make the world's roads and drivers safer. And the only way that you can make it safer is by creating a feedback loop to an individual. And I've often said this to a number of people, there's a lot of different measurement tools that exist out there, but if you don't get the feedback for that measurement, then it doesn't help you as an individual. And that's where really we started. We started with the ability to assess an individual driver's risk. And over time, what you can see is drivers improve with feedback. We were at the Transportation Research Board's Summit in January of this year presenting data to that effect, that we can effectively reduce individual driver risk. And driver risk changes over time. It's not static. There really are no good or bad drivers. They're safe or unsafe trips. And if you take more safe trips, then you're going to be a safer driver. But the reality is that context or things can change in your life, and now all of a sudden a normally safe driver all of a sudden is in a situation where maybe they're stressed, maybe they haven't slept well, maybe they have a new job that goes to a new area that they're not familiar with, or they're late for a flight. Now all of a sudden that driver's going to drive differently. So the more that we can provide feedback to drivers and help them understand that risk, then we can improve safety. And what we realized was, once we take all of that information, we can start to realize trends over time. You can see things like distracted driving went up about 30% during the pandemic. Speeding went through the roof as well. And those behaviors ultimately led to a significant rise in serious crashes. Those serious crashes led to an increase in fatalities. And over the last 4 years or so, we've been analyzing on that and reporting on it. And these are the type of things where we are putting together significant amounts of research and making it available for free on our assessment of individual driver risk in aggregate.
So what do you do with the data to make things safer on the roads?
Yeah, so probably the first thing that we do is awareness. So if you look at hands-free laws over the last few years, the hands-free laws were impacted or were implemented as a result of legislation, from the initial days of texting and driving, no texting and driving, and then smartphones became ubiquitous and texting, became synonymous with scrolling Instagram and everything else that people do on their phones. So what we've been able to do is start to take that information and look at, okay, there's a problem that's evolving on the roads that's not being addressed. And the reason it's not being addressed is not because people are not aware of it. It really comes down to the fact that people, the data isn't there. So, if you walk in and talk to people, hey, do you think distracted driving is an issue? People are going to say yes. But the reality is, if you look at the National Center for Statistical Analysis, you look at FARS, the data that comes out of what is the really in-depth information relative to fatal crashes, you realize that distracted driving is significantly underrepresented because the data is just simply not there at that time. It's very hard to find that out. So what we started to do is publish extensively on prevalence data, publish extensively on where, when, and how. We've noticed that 34% of the crashes that we detected, a driver's phone is in their hand at the time of the crash. And that information is not necessarily known broadly. So when we started publishing on it, we started to realize there was more media awareness to it, there was more attention to it. And then what happened was we started getting phone calls from folks in state highway safety offices and DOTs around the country. And they said, hey, you've done such an interesting job reporting on these elements in aggregate, but how does it affect where I live? What are the impacts to my state? So then we started to realize that we have a lot of value to bring to help to understand where crashes are going to happen, where the risk is changing, whether a law is being implemented effectively or not. And that's really been the transformation of moving from individual to aggregate risk.
How do you see the industry incorporating AI and as automated vehicles increase with this type of technology that you're developing?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're probably the largest AI mobility company that nobody knows about because we have been built from MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab. That's where we started. That technology was incubated for years, and we've been doing this for over a decade, where we are using AI and mobility information to detect crashes, to detect behaviors that lead to crashes. So, right now today, AI is being used by over 11 million drivers as they drive around today at this moment. And those drivers, those trips are bringing about 1 trillion data points in that are being analyzed by AI to determine a number of different things. Number one, how is risk changing? How is an individual driver's risk moving over time? What kind of incentives or feedback do we need to give to that individual? What does that mean for the aggregate roadway structure? Are the roads safer today than they were yesterday? Is there something that's changed, in an individual hotspot? And then you'll go even further from that. Have we detected a crash? And we are doing this in real time. So for example, if you're a customer of Progressive Insurance, they rolled out a system last year that all the customers of Progressive are getting free crash detection. They don't have to pay for it. So if you're a customer, you download the Progressive app, and now if you get into a crash and it's not observed, you have emergency help. You have a guardian angel that's there watching over you. And that is an evolution because the technology has advanced so much. And it doesn't require the latest iPhone. It doesn't require the latest Google or Android Pixel phone. It is in use for millions of people. And by the way, it's not just here in the US. It's being used in Asia. It's being used in South Africa. It's being used in Europe. And the fact that this has grown over time, it's a really practical use of AI that doesn't have, maybe the same, excitement of a self-driving car that are speeding all over the place around here. We're actually not speeding, but, are driving all over the place. I've seen so many. But what it is, it's a practical use of AI that is being used to understand and identify crash risks, respond to those crash risks, change behavior, and now we can take all the preponderance of this information and functionally do something. We can be effective in how that we're addressing issues that previously we'd have to wait for something to happen. So really, to me, AI is about the use of technology to move to a proactive stance of road safety away from reactive. And reactive means just waiting for the presence of or absence of a crash.
Ryan, really great information. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.